This is going to be my favorite part of the show because I get to talk about something I'm really passionate about, and I've always been really passionate about. It is the Beatles. Even the song that's playing behind us, "The Girl Who Loves Gin," you can clearly tell it's a Beatles-esque song in nature, just from the way I'm singing and stuff like that. And that's because I've grown up with the Beatles. My first record that I really bought was A Hard Day's Night. The first record that we owned as getting interested in the Beatles was Yellow Submarine. So an interesting entryway to that. And so this week, Peter Jackson, along with Disney Plus, released Let It Be, the old 1970s, a 1970 movie that obviously had the album accompany it, and really that documented the end of the Beatles and the last live performance of the Beatles. Now, a couple years ago, if it wasn't last year, I think it may have been 2 years ago, they released Get Back, right, which was basically releasing a long 3-part, 4-part series that showed all the extra footage that director Michael Lindsay Hogg had, right? And they restored it, and they made this basically 4x3 shot film thing, and they used the power of AI and machine learning to kind of expand it and restore the footage. And that was incredible. An incredible job by Peter Jackson, who previously... Sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit. But previously, Peter Jackson restored some World War I footage for a movie called They Shall Not Grow Old. And if you've never watched that movie that he put out, that's a really, really touching documentary about people who fought in World War I. And he restores footage using AI technology, using machine learning, using his system that they created called MAL, to restore the footage so that it feels like you're there, right? Now with the Beatles, I guess he got access to all the footage, and they released Get Back, which was a very, very long, Lord of the Rings long delve into why Let It Be was not as negative of a film as it has been purported to be, right? The stigma against this film was always that it was the end of the Beatles. It was kind of like a look inside of how negative the group was becoming, which was, even before I had seen it, I had heard people say, yeah, it's not a very good movie, Let It Be. And it's a lot of them bickering back and forth. As I watched it as an adult, you kind of realize that there's like 2 moments where they really bicker, and you don't really see the fallout as much as it's been reported about since, right? Get Back does a probably better job showing you the entire story narrative of what happened, and moments that they don't necessarily get into and Let It Be at all, about George leaving the group, the different emotional reactions that Paul and John have from the group breaking up, the bickering, the sniping, the patronizing nature of John and Paul towards the other members of the band, George and Ringo. Get Back does a great job delineating that and showing you that and really giving you proper context that Let It Be just didn't give you, right? If you're not a big Beatles fan and you watch this film, it really does feel like you're just a fly on the wall, right? To a band rehearsing for a concert that is on the roof, right? You're not getting a sense of what's happening, why it's important, and what's going on, because there's really none of that, right? The original film cuts so much that it really gives you this condensed version of like, what's going on? It gives you no context, gives you no narrative. So if you were to watch this, I would actually suggest you watch Get Back first and then watch the original film, because it gives you so much more understanding of what's happening. And and why things are occurring, right? If you just watch this film without watching the context of Get Back, and you don't know the Beatles, you start wondering, why is Billy Preston there? He just pops up, right? Why are they in one location then in another? you miss so many critical parts of why this is important, and historically why this is a film about the band breaking up, right? In 1970, I can imagine when this thing was released, it's no wonder this thing took on the reputation of being a documentary about the Beatles breaking up, because the Beatles broke up in 1970, right? I think they were dissolved in 71, right? And by the courts, right? So when you have that kind of floating around in the news and then you watch this, you start kind of applying your own bias there about like, oh, they must have been at each other's throats. And I think that's what Get Back a couple of years ago dispelled, right? When you watch this stuff now, when you watch the film now, you don't really get that connotation anymore. You know it's the end of their careers, but I think it comes with a little bit more understanding that, well, they're adults. They're drifting apart, right? That's what happens, right? With people that are, artistically growing into their own, right? You got to think that when this thing is filmed, John is 29, Paul is 27, George is 26, and Ringo's 29, right? Which, to be honest, is like a ripe time to have a crisis in your life, right? Of what you want to do for the rest of your life, right? 55 years on, watching this and being older than the Beatles at this point, at that time, you kind of start to understand why everything's a little bit more emotionally dramatic than it probably should be. And also we have the benefit of hearing context. We have 55 years of context of people talking about it ad nauseum, and Paul McCartney adding his additional, well, this is how we felt. This is how I felt. This is how John felt. This is how George felt. All that kind of stuff. The movie, I had read previously that the movie was critically panned back then for being a movie that had no plot, was kind of dawdling, and didn't really have any structure to it. All of those criticisms still apply today, right? Despite the fact that they've restored it and made it look good and made it sound good, right? It adds to it adds to the movie, but it still doesn't take away from the movie that the movie feels like it's a recovery. And Lindsay Hogg, in the beginning, they have an interview with him and Peter Jackson 55 years later, in 2023, I guess, basically saying as much, saying that we thought it was going to be a concert movie, but we had to kind of shift in the middle of filming, and we realized we were filming a documentary. So we didn't go about this in a way that was prepared. We were kind of doing it on the fly. And that's what it feels like. It feels like a movie that was really stitched together as like a last hope of, okay, well, we have a lot of footage. Let's stitch it together in somewhat of an enjoyable way. And if you look at it that way, it's actually kind of an accomplishment of what they put together, because there's no plot. Like, you're just watching a band create music, right? It doesn't have any structure, but it kind of has a flow, right? If you know the Beatles. It is fun to see them kind of interact. It's also fun to see it in a really nice format where people can enjoy it. I don't know if there was any kind of hesitation from the Beatles Corporation, Apple, whatever you want to call it now, to release this movie, but I felt like the acclaim behind the 4 Beatles movies was always, Hard Day's Night was first, Help was like second, Magical Mystery Tour was like, a psychedelic experience that no one wanted to remember, and then Let It Be, right? Hard Day's Night was, I think a success then, and it's always been a success from re-releases, and it's always showing the Beatles in the best light. That's a properly directed, and I say properly directed in quotes because it's not the greatest thing in the world in terms of movies, but it's fun. It's a collection of music videos, if you will, for the Beatles in their prime early years, right? It is the stereotype of what everyone thinks of Beatlemania is that film. Help is kind of the same thing. Bad plot, British film, whatever. Magical Mystery Tour just seems like an experiment gone wrong, but I think it's so weird that it works on its own. And again, still has that same, like, it's a collection of music videos, right? That kind of string it together. It's music videos before music videos really knew what to do with themselves, right? This isn't Michael Jackson's Thriller, where it's a huge production. It is a string of them spliced together. Let It Be is a different concept, right? I think it's a clever, it's a clever concept, but I felt like it was never advertised, even when I was a kid, with big availability, because I think that the reputation behind the film was always, it was Paul being Paul McCartney, and it was him being negative. It was him kind of, controlling the group. And I think that reputation that the film got for it being like an ugly period of the band's lifetime stopped, I think, the Beatles Corporation from really pushing it forward as like, hey, go watch this movie. I think Get Back helped this movie get this release, because with that proper context of people having fun, and Paul McCartney even said so in an interview, I think, with Peter Jackson, saying, I knew it was fun because I remember being in it, but the film doesn't show a lot of those fun moments of it, of them being a band together. They focus on kind of them bickering a little bit more. I think with Get Back as a proper background, this film could coexist now. And so it's good to see that they've actually done that and released it. It was hard to find as a kid, even on VHS, on DVD. There wasn't a lot of places that actually had the original film out. And that's what I was talking about. It's just like the availability of this film was very, very low in the 55 years since. And so I'm sure an amazing Beatle fan will be like, no, it wasn't. But, I'm not chasing these things down like it's gold in a river, right? But yeah, go check it out. It's an interesting, if you like the Beatles, you're definitely going to check it out. Anyways, if you don't like the Beatles, go check out Get Back, what they released with this thing. But, maybe watch this first, maybe watch it in a different order. It gives you a proper appreciation for what's happening, and shows you a band basically at the very precipice trying to hold it all together. And it's just an interesting peek behind the curtain of what it was like towards the end, and gives you some funny moments. It humanizes the Beatles in a way that I think they rarely get humanized, right? Just seeing them talk to each other, seeing Paul McCartney talk to John Lennon in a way of like expressing some sort of stressful moment. It humanizes them. It makes you realize that these are just insanely creative people working hard at something and trying to work out the kinks here and there. If anything, check out this movie too, just to see George working through I Me Mine, or Ringo and George working through Octopus's Garden. It's worth just that view. And then watch Get Back. So it's an enjoyable thing. It's a re-release that I think has finally gotten proper context, and it's a fun to see my favorite band and what they did at the very, very end. And it's good to have all this footage of them, because the footage looks great. Whatever they're doing and whatever they're doing with the sound with that technology is just astounding, because it sounds way better. And this is a way better viewing experience than how I watched this movie years ago, which I think was in 2002, on somebody had bootlegged it on YouTube, all like 12 parts. So such a better viewing experience. Go watch it on Disney Plus. Again, that's Let It Be, the original film remastered from Peter Jackson, the directed feature by Michael Lindsay Hogg.